All right, so you all know I love to be creative with the sermon titles, okay? And so The Price is Right, you know where that came from, all right? And most of you all, if you've been around long enough, this series is called The Facts of Life. So you're familiar with the TV show, possibly. It's something that I used to see like every now and then. For those who don't know, it's a show, it's an actual show. It began in 1979 and it ran all the way to 1988. Y'all know I like to give weird facts like that, but it started in 1979, ran all the way to 1988, and it was about a group of girls who were in their adolescent period. And during that adolescent period, they went through a lot of different struggles. They were able to learn different things, and so they dealt with the issues of life, and so they ended up calling it The Facts of Life. It was supposed to be named something else, but it ended up becoming that. So I decided to affectionately entitle this series The Facts of Life. And the purpose of this sermon series is to acknowledge and to address some of the most misunderstood problems and issues that plague mankind. If we're going to truly understand the deeper, more complex things in this life, we all need the tools that only God can give us. We need those tools, and those tools are outlined in His Word, the manual. So we're going to explore ideas and principles and approaches to combat what I call the realities of life, the realities of life. And when I say realities of life, what do I mean? I mean that it is something that we all have to, at some point in time, we have to deal with. The realities of life is something that we all have to deal with. And the question is, how are we going to do it? Are we going to do it this way? Or are we going to do it that way? How are we going to do it? So we're going to take a look at the realities of life, some of which include, but not limited to, bad things can happen to good people. The world can be a hateful place. We're going to look at the realities that people can and will betray you. People will steal. That most things in life is out of your control. That's a really hard reality right there. That some people will walk away from you. That some people will never get to be in your life, even though they may have wanted to. We're going to take a look at the realities that some relationships don't pan out and that you can't please everyone. We're going to take a look at the realities that failure is inevitable and pain is inevitable. We're going to take a look at how divorce happens. We're going to take a look at one of the greatest pains in life, the realities of life, is regret, the pain of regret. We're going to take a look at the realities that sicknesses come out of nowhere and plague everyone, regardless of if you are impacted directly by it or not. We're going to take a look at the reality that time goes by much faster than you think. And the greatest reality that one day we all will die. That's just to name a few. Turn with me to 1 Kings chapter 3. And when you get there, say He mastered it. Of course, I mean Jesus, you all. Of course. Of course. 1 Kings chapter 3, it says, now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord, and the wall all around Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the people sacrificed at the high places because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until those days. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. Verse 5. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask, what shall I give you? Man, that's something that I would love God to appear to me and say. Down in verse 7, it says, now, O Lord, my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David. But I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or to come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore, give your servant an understanding heart, to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? This speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. Then God said to him, because you have asked this thing and have not asked long life for yourself, nor have you asked for riches for yourself, nor have you asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Behold, I have done according to your words. Seeing I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has been none anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I also have given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings of your days. So if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. Then Solomon awoke, and indeed it had been a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, offered up burnt offerings, offered peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. The reality is that if we're going to be able to deal with the realities of life, we have to start off with the truth. Solomon knew that in order to accomplish what he was trying to accomplish, the truth was that he needed to seek God. He needed to seek God, because without it, the harsh realities of life would overtake him. Now, the reason why I chose the truth as one of the first steps for us to deal with the harsh realities of life is because we cannot combat the things that come to us in life without the truth. You can't fight this world with lies. You have to start with the truth, and the foundation is the truth of God. And the truth about the truth is that we need God. We need him. Now, a lot of what we see nowadays is that there's a lot of people who have platforms. The era that we live in now, we are in the most technologically advanced part of society ever, and we have the highest form of communication. But none of that, one, it doesn't mean that we're stewarding it properly. And two, it doesn't mean that we're any closer to the truth. Just because we're more advanced doesn't mean that we're closer to what the truth actually is. As a matter of fact, when you think about it, if it's not stewarded properly, it can push you further away from the truth. And that's what we need. And so God always has something to say about his creation, and he always has something he always has something to say about his creation and the actions of his creation. Turn me to John chapter 6. And in the 6th chapter of John, we're going to start at verse 47. Jesus is speaking, and he says, most assuredly I say to you, he who believes in me has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and are dead. This bread which comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. Let's go down to verse 53. He says, then Jesus said, then most assuredly I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. Jesus had a lot of controversial, or what most people consider controversial conversations and interactions. Here we are, we see someone who was literally the truth himself. He himself was the truth. And now he finds himself dealing with his creation, telling them the truth about life. He's telling them the truth about life, and this is their response. Let's go down to verse 60. It says, therefore, many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, this is a hard saying. Who can understand it? And Jesus knew in himself that his disciples complained about this. He said to them, does this offend you? It's the same thing that Jesus is saying through his word and through other people today about certain things. He's like, does my word offend you? When somebody tells you that I'm the only way, the truth, and the life, does that offend you? But I hope it doesn't, because you can't deal with the harsh realities of life without understanding that I am the truth. You can't deal with the harsh realities of life without understanding that I came down for an actual purpose. And that history proves, scientifically and in many other ways, it proves that I am who I said I was. He said, so the disciples, they heard about this and they're like, man, it's like, so he's saying all these different things that they haven't really heard about. They're placing a lot of the Old Testament figures on these higher pedestals. And they're like, man, those laws and those people, then Christ is like, I'm greater than them. Then he goes down, and in verse 66, it says, from that time, many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. Sometimes that is people's response to the truth. The harsh reality was, regardless of how much these people placed the Old Testament figures and the ancestors, no matter how high they placed them on that pedestal, the harsh reality was Christ was greater than them. And they could not accept that. That was something that they hadn't heard before. But guess what? It didn't make it any less true. It can be hard, but it's still the truth. So then Jesus said to the 12, so Christ had a lot of different followers. And so a lot of his following, and there's two separate groups, a lot of his following outside of the 12 were like, I don't know if I can deal with that. And then he turns to his innermost, the 12, and he says, do you also want to go away? I mean, I always think about that in myself. I'm like, is there anything that I'm doing or anything that I believe that would keep me, what would cause me to have the same response that these disciples did? Do I believe anything that would be so hard for me to actually understand what God actually has as the truth? And it's so funny because I look at our court system and I look at the different components that make up our society. And one of the phrases, and I think you all can finish this, it says, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? That's what we say.
This is true.
Says the Lord. It's like, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? So it's like, and I think about it, it's like, what matters more? What people think is true or what God actually says is true?
What God said is true.
But when you stop and think about it and you dissect it, people put more stock in what people actually think to be true. So let's say the teacher was here on Monday and he has a class full of 13 students. Let's just say this teacher's name, Mr. Brown, right? And so Mr. Brown shows up on Monday and he's like, okay, guys, we're going to have a test on Friday. And then come Tuesday, Mr. Brown doesn't show up. And on Wednesday, he doesn't show up. And Thursday, he doesn't show up. And then he's like, he told you that on Friday you were going to have a test. But then on Monday, most of the students believed him, like all of them did. And then on Tuesday, some of them believed, and then the number got smaller and smaller and smaller. Till no one believed that he actually was going to get this test on Friday. Is he still going to give the test? Yeah. He's still going to give the test. So it didn't matter what most people believe, because none of that moves the rock of truth. It's the same thing when it comes to our walk. If we're going to combat the realities, the harsh realities that relationships fail, the harsh realities that people walk away, the harsh realities that one day we are not going to be here, then we have to start with the truth. And the truth starts with a person, Christ, and it's in his word. In the 18th chapter of John, same book, 18th chapter of John, and in verse 37. Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king then? Jesus answered, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth? And when he said this, he went out among the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. Christ is like, I am truth. Me, my mission. John chapter 18, verse 36 and 37. Christ is like, I embody that. The truth is that I came. And I know there are going to be belief systems that come after me that are going to say that I was just a good man and that I was just a prophet and that I believed in morals and that was it. And that I really didn't die on the cross. There are going to be all these different belief systems that come after me that say this. And then some of them are going to deny my existence completely. But the truth is, I'm the only one and I'm the only way. You know, it's funny because when you stop and think about it, we don't really put as much value on the truth. Like most people don't put as much value on the truth as they should. But at the same time, everyone says they want truth. So it's funny. So I was reading this story this week and it says, one day a man named Truth and a man named Lie stood by a river just outside of town. They were twin brothers. This is true. By the end of this, I want y'all to guess which one is me and Daniel, okay? Lie challenged Truth to a race, claiming that he could swim across the river faster than Truth. Lie laid out the rules to the challenge, stating that they both must remove all of their clothes and at the count of 3, dive into the freezing cold water to swim to the other side and back. Lie counted to 3. He said 1, 2, 3. But when Truth jumped in, Lie did not. As Truth swam across the river, Lie put on Truth's clothes and walked back into town dressed as the Truth. He proudly paraded around town pretending to be Truth. Truth made it to the shore and back, but his clothes were gone when he got back and he was left naked. The only thing he had to put on was Lie's clothes. Refusing to dress himself as a Lie, Truth walked back to town naked. People stared and glared as naked Truth walked through the town. He tried to explain what happened and that he was in fact Truth, but because he was naked and uncomfortable to look at, people mocked and shunned him, refusing to believe that he was the Truth. The people in the town chose to believe Lie because he was dressed appropriately and easier to look at. And from that day forward, people have come to believe a Lie rather than to believe the naked Truth.
We've seen Daniel die before.
Well, when I saw that story, first of all, I laughed really hard. I laughed really hard at that because that's exactly what happens. People don't always want it, even though they say they want it, and they were able to look at it and see. They were able to see him. Truth walked among us thousands of years ago. He was here. But what he did and what he said was uncomfortable to people. He corrected people, told people that they were wrong and that they should follow him, but it made them uncomfortable. And so we can't combat the harsh realities of life. And I'm gonna tell you, one of the harshest realities of life is when you come to grips with your own mortality. Because you're like, man, I'm actually not gonna be here forever. And I've seen people at different stages of their life come to grips with that and their different responses based off whether or not they had the truth. So if you don't have the truth, you're like, this saddens you. This puts you in deep despair because you know your time is coming. But if you do have the truth, you realize, okay, wow, I lived a good life. I am not infinite, right? That's the response. So we have to have it. I was looking over in Proverbs chapter 27 and verse 6. Proverbs 27 verse 6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. What are they saying? They're saying, I would rather someone tell me something that I don't want to hear, and it's the truth, than for you to lie to me and it feel good. 2 Timothy chapter 4. Second Timothy chapter 4 and verse 3 says that for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. But you be watchful in all things, enduring afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill the ministry. It's like the time is going to come. People say they want the truth. They say they want the constructive criticism, but you can't combat that without the truth. And at the end of the day, I think about it like this when it comes to that, when it comes to truth and lies, the truth will always prevail. People have lied from the beginning of time throughout the years, and they will not stop completely until God comes back. But when he comes back, the only thing that's going to be left is the truth. It's just harder to see it right now because there's so much other things in the way. Families that suffer loss, they want the truth. People that have been wrong, they want the truth. Businesses that have failed and have suffered fraud, they want the truth. And it's impossible to reach our destiny without the truth. And one of the biggest lies that's ever been told is that mankind can do things their own way. It's not the truth. Turn me to 3 John in the 4th verse. 3 John, it's only one chapter. And in verse 4, it says, I have no greater joy than to hear my children walk in truth. The individuals that were charged with the task of delivering the gospel, the one and only gospel, to other individuals in different parts of the world, their response was, I have no greater joy. I have no greater joy than to know that people are actually believing the truth about life. No greater joy. The truth about truth is that truth is so important that God said it brings him joy too when his children walk in truth. And if there's anything to be wrong about, the one thing you shouldn't be wrong about is the truth. And people have to take the time to invest in it. Amen. The next step we're going to look at to combat the harsh realities, to combat the facts of life, is the unavoidable. So read to Acts chapter 9. And in the 9th chapter of Acts, Paul was going through a transformation. He was formerly Saul. He was going through a transformation. And in verse 16, it says, for I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake. The unavoidable reality of life is that rough times are inevitable. There's a phrase that people use often. It said when they say keep living. What are they saying? They're saying that if you keep living long enough, it's only a matter of time before you come up against some type of challenge in one way or another. Paul is a man that knows about challenges. During this transformation, Christ was like, joke's on you. You're about to find out. You're going to be beaten publicly. You're going to be shipwrecked. You're going to get bitten by a snake. You're going to think you're supposed to go that way, but you're really supposed to go that way. Turn me to Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 11. Solomon's giving his wisdom. And he says, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the men of understanding, nor favor to the men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all. He's like, listen, I tried to tell y'all, so now y'all got this world that's imperfect, and guess what? Things just happen. God, through his wisdom, is communicating us that time and chance happen to us all. It happens. And being a believer doesn't exempt us from struggle. Matter of fact, it's harder because when you're not a believer, you don't really have as much accountability. You can just kind of do what you want to do because you don't really have to answer to anybody. You think. Jesus said in John chapter 13, verse 16, he says, a servant is not greater than his master. He's like, if the world hated me, guess what? It's going to hate you too. He's like, you're going to have these challenges. You're going to have people who are going to persecute you, thinking that they're doing the right thing in my name. Guess what? That's a challenge. And whenever I think about it, I pray for our brothers and sisters that are in different parts of the world. Because the truth of the matter is, compared to them, we don't really have it that bad. We have access to pretty much anything. We have food, clothing, shelter, electricity, transportation, access to medical facilities. We have it pretty good. Like the challenges that we have. Now we face a different type of challenge, different levels, different things. But the truth is, the point is that the struggles and the challenges are inevitable, and that they're going to happen. And that's a hard reality for people to face when they're facing it without God. It's hard. And then later on in John chapter 16, Christ says, don't feel bad, because guess what? I overcame the world. I overcame the world. It is inevitable. One of the harsh realities is that people can be doing really, really well financially at one season, and then they can be on the other side of that in another. That's a harsh reality. But Christ said, the poor you'll have with you always. So it's unavoidable. Turn me to 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. First Peter chapter 5, verse 8 says, be sober and be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking who he may devour. I don't know about you, but whenever I hear that word vigilant, it's like, my head pops up, because that's a stronger word to be used to communicate that, hey, guess what? You need to pay extra attention to something. You don't warn people about things that aren't a threat. Also, what's being communicated right here? It's being communicated that Satan is relentless. He is always going to be coming after people until God ties him up and puts him away. He's always going to be coming after people. So if he's always going to be coming after people, and the Bible describes him as a lion that's always on the loose and on the prowl, then that means that it is inevitable that you are going to face some type of challenge in some kind of way. Right. New levels, new devils. The Christian walk is going to be filled with challenges, seen and unseen. Like some of the stuff, you'd be like, I can see that coming. Like a crack in the windshield, you're like, I see that. It starts off small, then it starts to spread, get a little bit bigger, get a little bit bigger. But then you running over a nail, 9 o'clock at night in the dark, you might not be able to see that. How will we respond? We will definitely respond with the truth. We will respond with the truth. We know the truth is that God is good. We respond by knowing that God himself went through pain. Turn me to Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews, the 4th chapter. In verse 15, start at verse 14. It says, seeing then that we have a great high priest who passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. It's unavoidable. Satan himself went after God himself, tried to tempt him, did try to tempt him. It's inevitable. Christ went through it. We're going to go through it. There's no way around it. But the Bible also says that what the devil meant for evil, God has used for good. So there's nothing wasted. So the trials and the tribulations and the different things that we go through, God uses that to build our character, to prepare us for the kingdom. I mean, you think about it. You think about an athlete that never trains. He or she will not be on the Olympic level. You have to lift weights. You have to go through conditioning. You have to put some type of training on. You have to go through something. And if you're like me, sometimes you're like, man, God, I done had my share. I'm good. I hear you. I believe it. It's inevitable. The key is, how will we respond? And first of all, do we even believe that is inevitable? Because some people hold to certain belief systems that you can get around it. Now you position yourself to obviously to avoid as much as you can, right? But at the same time, from start to finish, it's going to be something. That's just the harsh reality of life. It's going to be something. Christ had to pay a price. We definitely going to have to. I said a few months ago that everything costs something. Everything. All of my greatest accomplishments, I had to pay with something. This last accomplishment, I had to pay with time. No matter how fast I wanted it to go by, I couldn't speed it up. I had to pay with sacrifice. It was unavoidable. There were things that I wanted to do that I had to say no to because I held this thing in higher regard. I had to. It was unavoidable. And if we think about the greatest gift that we're going to ever receive, we have to pay with something. I heard a preacher say the other day, he said, man, Christianity is a whole bunch of saying no. It's a whole bunch of not doing what you want to do. And in a sense, I see what he's saying and what he means, because you are in a constant state. He's communicating that you're in a constant state of denying yourself. Man, that's tough. It's unavoidable. So anytime I go through something, I'll stop and think, I'm like, Christ went through something. Christ had to pay. They hated him, and he himself was the truth. He didn't lie. Think about it. He was an innocent man. He led a ministry, a public ministry, not a private one. He led a public ministry. Others chose to follow him. He worked verifiable miracles. People lied on him, and then they killed him. And he was God himself. So what am I saying? If God went through it, so do we. It's a harsh reality. Got to pay something. Turn me to Proverbs chapter 2. And in Proverbs chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4, we're going to start off with chapter 2 first, and then verse 6, and then we're going to go to verse 12. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 6 says, "For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding." And then over in verse 12, it says, "To deliver you from the way of evil, from the man who speaks perverse things." Verse 11, "Discretion will preserve you, understanding will keep you." Verse 3, the next chapter over, in verse 13, it says, "Happy is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gains understanding." It's like, I want to be happy. I need to understand. And then over in chapter 4, one chapter over, in verse 7, it says, "Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and in all you're getting, get understanding." You know, one of the things that contributes to the harsh realities of life is the fact that people don't have understanding. That's the problem. People don't have the understanding that can only come from God. It doesn't mean that they can't be good people and that they're not good people. It just means that you have to have the understanding. What's that mean? It means I have to believe the truth about life. What's the truth about life? That the Bible is true and that Christ came to die for my sins. And that if I believe in him, I can have what he wanted me to have in the very beginning, which is eternal life. Understanding. And most people are living their lives without understanding. Because they have access to so many other things that don't actually give understanding. They have a lot of knowledge, but we don't have a lot of understanding. The era we're in, we can access anything in a matter of seconds, but somehow we're not better off. That doesn't make sense. Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, and in verse 2, it says, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable, perfect will of God." He's like, in order to have that understanding, you got to have your mind renewed. You can't think that there's a bunch of different ways to God. You just can't. Don't matter how, and doesn't matter how long you believed it, don't matter how hard you believe it. It ain't but one way. People have become more comfortable with what is convenient. It's easier for me to believe this because it's an easier path for me, because I don't really have to believe this only one way, because this other person that's in my life, they believe that it's more than one way. And so if I have to believe that it's one way, then that means I have to tell the other person that's in my life that's closer to me that they're wrong by default. That's just what it is. You got to have the understanding. And people are getting it from all these different places. It's so crazy because one of the things, like the last couple of months, I think since like May, I usually like fast from certain things. So I like fasting from social media and stuff like that. So Eric, I see your messages and stuff, right? So, and I probably send Eric more messages than anybody. But one of the reasons why I fasted from social media so much is because there's so many people on there with so much content. And they're giving out this content and this information as if it's true. And I can't all the time, and everything is moderation, but for me, I don't, and it might be just the pages I follow. Other people might follow different pages on Instagram, different things of that nature. But it's like everybody has a platform. Anybody can say anything. Like, they giving out relationship advice. And I'm like, that's definitely not gonna work. Even I know that one, that ain't gonna work. They don't have the understanding that can only come from God. You understand what I'm saying? I'm not judging these people because everybody has their own story, everybody has their own walk. But when you stop and think about it, it's like, where does that information come from, though? Did that come from your experiences? So it's like, I'm not picking on the ladies, but a lot of the time I see it on there, it's like, oh, all men are this and all men are that. I'm like, did you just date the man that was a dog? Yeah, and then there's the men who say, women only want one thing. They want to go, and it's so crazy. So I'm going to tangent real quick. So I got back on social media this past week, and I saw this dude. So he was talking to this woman about expectations in a relationship. And so she was basically telling him that she's not going to go out with him unless he gives her a certain amount of money, unless he's willing to spend a certain amount of money on her. And I'm thinking to myself, and he's like, okay, well, what am I going to give? And I'm like, bro, even if you do give that to her, it's still not even worth it though. She's like, are you going to buy me this type of bag? You going to buy me that type of bag? And I'm like, you think that bag means something? It's a lot of people that got bags and they unhappy. Not that kind of bag. The other kind of bag. The air hole of a bag. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, man, you know, and I'm looking at the conversation and I'm thinking to myself, like what Jesus told the man when he was walking, he's like, blind lean to blind. They both, I'm looking at the conversation, I'm like, y'all, neither one of y'all give it. Blind lean to blind. And I'm just like, that's crazy though. Because even if he give, why would you want to go out with somebody, be with somebody that is only with you because of what they can give you? But that's the message that's being communicated. So if I'm a younger female who just started out dating in my 20s or whatever, I see that, and then that becomes my guy. So it may not be the amount of money that woman was getting, but I think to myself, the man has to give me something. And vice versa for the men too. It's just a bunch of nonsense. It's not real understanding. And it doesn't come from those different places. You know, people's minds have to be renewed. And if they have to be renewed, then that means that they were at one point in time in a state where it wasn't what's best for you. We were deceived, basically. If I have to change, then that means I used to be something else. Turn to me to 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 14. First Corinthians chapter 2 and in verse 14, it says, the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him. Nor can he know them because they are spiritually discerned. Basically, we need God's help to get understanding. There are certain things that I can't understand, even if I wanted to. Even if I wanted to, I can't. If I'm in that natural state. If I'm in that natural state. Because then, if I'm in that natural state, that means I turn around, and then when I do hear the truth, guess what I think it is? Foolishness. Just like when Lai was walking around in truth clothes, he was still who he was. Daniel was still Daniel. I mean, Lai was still Lai.
Hey, this is certain.
Yes, but it still doesn't change anything. We have to be, so we can't receive. We don't properly interpret what we're looking at if we're in a natural state. It's people that are arguing on social media and doing different things, and not just there, but in different platforms and different things of that nature. They can't receive it. Because God, the truth is, God has designed life to be structured a certain way. So if I'm outside of that structure, then that means that I won't be able to get it. So he designed things with the truth being the fact that Jesus was the only one that came. And then some people probably to this day are still waiting on him to come. Some people say he never came. That's the truth is the truth. The word also says, a good understanding have they who keep his commandments. So God designed things in a way where if we are obedient and we are keeping his commandments, then I get this as a reward and understand. We started school this past week, and it's another blessing. I started at a new school, just overall a better situation. And so like the first 2 weeks of school, I teach third grade this year. And again, and the first 2 weeks of school, I'm always training them and teaching them about what my expectations are so that they'll know what to get me. And so I'm explaining to them that, hey, if you do this, then you get this. If you don't do this, then this is what happens, right? Because they're not too young to understand that life has consequences, and that because they know all the lyrics to the different rap songs, and they ask me, is man, you on TikTok and all this other, like they know all of that. They know all of this stuff that they necessarily shouldn't know, but then they don't know the stuff that matters. And so one of the things I harp on early on in the school year is communication. And I tell them, hey guys, communication is a life skill. You're gonna have to learn how to do this from now on. So you might as well learn right now. So how do we say certain things? If somebody has something in mind, what do I do? Do I just go over there, smack them upside the head and take it? Or am I polite and say, hey, that's mine, right? So communication. So what he's saying is the different things that people want, they don't always get because they don't understand the structure. I'm letting them know this is what happens when you do this. The manual to life is saying the same thing. This is what happens when you do this. So don't be surprised or call me mean when you naturally reap the consequences of your actions. I tell them all the time, I'm like, if I don't go to work, I don't get paid. And they're like, oh yeah, that's true. So I say, your job is to come in school every day, prepared and ready to learn. Teaching them this so that they can be interpreted. So I want them to get used to my voice so they can understand that when I'm telling them something, they already trust what I'm telling them. So that you just finish up the second week of school, I had more students come up to me after school was over than I did the first week. Why? Because they're starting to get more comfortable and they're starting to understand, okay, I can trust what he tells me. I'm always their first boy teacher, they say. They used to having a lot of females. And so that's what it is. So I want them to have that understanding that, hey, you know what? This is the right structure. This is what it comes with. And so again, to combat the harsh realities of life, you got to have that understanding. And I seen like one of the worst things too, I seen is that people, when they deal with loss of different kinds, not just like a physical loss, but a person that may not no longer be in their life. It's like, if they don't have that understanding, it's gonna be hard. Like it's gonna be hard. That's tough. God defines righteousness as being in right standing with him. So when it comes to the Bible, it's only two ways. Either you are in right standing or you're not. You call a bill company and you're like, what's my balance? And they're like, oh, you up to date. So you're in right standing with them. But then if you call them and they're like, oh, you owe $300, you're not in right standing with them. So I can't have that understanding if I don't understand what it is. If I don't think I owe anything and the company is clearly telling me that I do, what's the likelihood of that bill actually getting paid if I don't even think I owe it? A good understanding have they who love the Lord. And I think about our overall disposition as children of God, because as children of God, we have access to certain things. Because the Bible says, as many as believed in him, he gave the right to become children of God. And so they have that understanding. And so life is a whole lot easier when you have that understanding. Turn with me to Psalms, the 86th chapter. Psalms 86. So I think about it a lot of times too, and one of the first things that came, and through this series, we're going to look at a lot of different topics, a lot of different ideas, a lot of different things of that nature. But one of the first ones I wanted to address is communication with God. And the reason why I say there's two things. One is like, how does God actually communicate with us? And two, what determines if he fulfills the request that we want? Like, how is that determined? So communication with God, two things. How does he actually communicate with me? Is he communicating in a way that I don't even expect him to communicate in? And two, what determines if he fulfills that request? If I've been praying for something over and over and over and over for a long extended period of time, like the widow in the parable, it's like, what's going to actually cause God to move on that? Communication with God is one of those harsh realities for most people because they just simply don't understand, one, who he is, and two, how he communicates. So you might even hear people who don't even believe in God say, oh my God. Or they might even say, send up a prayer for me, something of that nature. What are they saying? They're communicating, hey, you know what? Life circumstances have become so harsh and the reality of life has hit me in such a way that I'm willing to believe in something that I haven't even believed in my whole life. If it means I'm able to deal with what's in front of me right now. I'm so desperate that I am willing to call on someone or something or the universe or whatever in order to help me deal with this harsh reality that's right in front of me. That's tough. Psalms 86. In verse 5, it says, for you, Lord, are good and ready to forgive and abundant in mercy to all those who call upon you. That's the truth. That's the truth. He has more than enough mercy to go around to all who call upon him. But that only comes with understanding. That only comes with having your mind renewed. Verse 6, it says, give ear, O Lord, to my prayer and attend to the voice of my supplication. Like, Lord, listen to me. Pay attention to me. I know you see me. I know you see me. Then in verse 7, it says, in the day of my trouble, in the day of my harsh reality, in the day that I realized I can't beat this problem the way I thought I was going to be able to beat it, I will call upon you and you will answer me. Does my communication with God determine how I view the realities of my life? Does it? Does my communication with God determine how I view the realities of my life? So if I pray and God answers my prayers, then that means that God is, first of all, he's real and he's there. But then if I pray and he doesn't necessarily answer the way that I think he should, if I'm looking for it from another direction and he's doing it in a different way, what does that mean for me? So I always go back. I start with the basics. I start with the fundamentals. I start with the fact that God is good. I know he's good. And if I know he's good, then I know he wants good for me. And if I know he wants good for me, then he's seeing my struggle or whatever it is that I'm going through. And he has already answered it, likely in a way that I haven't been looking for. And they always say, like, most people know. They just like in the Old Testament, he wanted the proof. He wanted to wet up the area. It's like, all right, Gideon, wet up the area and then light that on fire. You do that, and I know, like that's how people are. By nature, that's what we revert back to a lot of times, because no one in their right mind willingly chooses like to go the wrong way. My communication with God, with God, like I said before, communication is a life skill. And let me tell you something. Sometimes I have learned that children are better at it than adults. You be hard pressed. A lot of like my students, they come up to me and they will tell you the hard truth. It's around your breath stink. It's around like, oh, that drawing was, I'm drawing something on the board. They're like, that's I can't read that. Children a lot of times are better at communicating than adults. So if it's a life skill, and unless I learn to become proficient in it, not completely master it, but if I can learn to become proficient in communication, then it's very possible that if I don't learn it, if I don't learn to become proficient in that area, it's very possible that I'm gonna keep finding myself in a cycle of frustration. Like if I keep looking for A and B and C and D and E and F are coming, and I keep looking for A, I'm gonna keep finding myself in a frustrated point because I'm looking for the wrong thing. And a lot of times people have this idea and this view in their mind of how God communicates. It's just like some people can have an image of how he is in their own head. Like he looks like this, he sounds like this. We can do the same thing when it comes to communicating with him, because we don't realize that he could be communicating differently than how I anticipated. It's tough. Turn me to John chapter 11. Say he's in the home stretch. And in John chapter 11, it's a story about this man who died. And this man, he had two sisters. And so it says in verse 4, when Jesus heard that, let's go to verse 3 so we can figure the whole thing. Verse 3, it says, therefore his sister sent to him saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. I'm going to tell you something. Now, listen, in the Bible days, they knew how to phrase stuff to get people to move. They're like, you know that man you love? He's sick. Did that work? They don't be like, hey, you know, that dude you couldn't stand, he's sick. He's like, okay. He's like, the one whom you love is sick. And when Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. He like, I love all of y'all. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. When he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. When he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Martha and Mary were expecting that when he heard that he was sick, he was going to come right away. He was going to tell them, hey, look that way, and snap his fingers. He'd be right there with Lazarus. Or he was going to do like how the centurion was. He was like, just say the word. You ain't even got to come. You don't even got to pull up on me. Just say it. So then, after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. Then the disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and you going there again? Jesus answered and said, are not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world. Then in verse 12, his disciples said, Lord, if he sleep, he'll get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking a rest. Then he finally said, no, he's not asleep, y'all. He's dead. Verse 25, it says, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. And down in verse 35, it says, Jesus wept. He cried. Which goes back to previously. He knows what it's like. He knows that once sin entered the world, that death was inevitable. It goes back to one of the other points. It's inevitable. We can't avoid it. What they say in life, 2 things are certain, death and taxes. Can't avoid it. Death, taxes, and Christ is coming back. Then in verse 36, it says, then the Jews said, see how he loved him? And some of them said, could not this man who have opened the eyes of the blind also kept this man from dying? And Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there's a stench. Like, we want to, but it's going to smell too bad. He's been dead 4 days. You didn't come right away, right when we told you. We didn't have to wait for a prayer from heaven. We had you right here in human form. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that I would believe, that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Same thing he's saying, didn't I tell you that if you believe, you'll see the glory of God? One day we're going to see him coming back from the clouds. He's like, didn't I tell you that? Hallelujah. Then he took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Now, when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. The historians say that he said Lazarus' name intentionally, because if he didn't say Lazarus' name, everybody there would have got up and was dead. That's how much power he has. So then he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he who had died came out bound, hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. What do I get out of this story? First mummy. But we also get that, hey, you know what? God can be doing something in a way that I don't think. They thought that he was going to come right away. And they definitely, even if they didn't think he was going to come right away, they definitely didn't think he was going to take 4 days. He was communicating with them. At no point in time did he ever stop being who he was. At no point in time did he lose his power. At no point in time did he not know where Lazarus was. He knew from the very beginning how he was going to respond to them and how he was going to answer them. He knew. It wasn't a surprise. Communication is a life skill, and unless we become proficient in it, we can find ourselves in a cycle of frustration. We don't want to look for God in the wrong way. He communicates primarily through his word, and there are times where God can reveal himself in a dramatic fashion, but it's not necessarily the norm. He can use people, he can use animals, he can use any part of his creation. He used birds before, he used a really big fish. He can use social media, he can use TV, he can use us to communicate to other people. Hey, tell them who I am and how I communicate. Because doesn't the word say that, hey, we are supposed, in Matthew chapter 5, it says that we are supposed to let our light shine so that other people can see it and believe. So part of that light shining is communicating, a lot of times verbally, the gospel in order for people to understand the truth about life, which is God is who he is. It's all about the communication. And so, like I said, one of the harsher realities of life is the communication with God. And I see sometimes, people are like, man, I prayed and nothing happened, and I prayed and God didn't answer me fast enough, and he didn't do this, he didn't do that. I'm like, first of all, God is perfect in all his ways. He's not obligated to do anything. He operates independently of us. He was here before us and he was here after us. Now that that's out of the way, he's like, I told you, part of what you're going through is because you're hard-headed. That's the communication part. People simply, that part is so important because that's where I've seen in my life a lot of times people fall off. Like, man, he didn't move fast enough. Man, he didn't do this, he didn't do that. So I'm like, okay, because he didn't do it, that means that he don't exist anymore? So which one is it? Are you upset at the fact that he didn't do it, or are you upset at something that doesn't exist? Doesn't make sense to be upset at something or someone that doesn't exist. I'm not upset at the Cookie Monster because he doesn't exist. I'm not upset at him. Me and him ain't got no beef. It's the same thing. So that part right there is so important that we have to, I don't want to say get it right, but we have to make sure that we're viewing it properly, and we always have the right posture in order to be in right standing with that part. Because if we don't get that part right, sometimes, and a lot of times, it can affect, the way it can affect the walk. And so we want to make sure we get that right. So definitely, so first to recap, we want to make sure that in order to combat the harsh realities of life, the first thing is that we have to have the truth. You can't fight this world, you can't fight the lies, you can't fight all of this stuff without the truth. Some things just unavoidable. It just is what it is. Time and chance happen to them all. Christ had to pay a price. He went through pain. He suffered, not only physically, but emotionally as well, because how do we think he felt to see his creation fall and his own creation turn against him? We have to have a good understanding. Some things in life, or most things in life, I'm not going to get without good understanding. I don't want someone working on my electrical system or my HVAC system or touching my body that does not have a good understanding of what they are doing. And then we have to make sure that we have the right perspective on communication and who God is and how he communicates, because if not, it can serve, the enemy can use that as a hindrance to push us towards fatigue and it hinder our walk. So next week, I'll be coming to you with part two of the facts of life.